Hi everyone, welcome to round 4 coverage of Levon Aronian's tournament in Tata Steel. In this game, he was facing off with the USA #1 player, Hikaru Nakamura, a very well-known attacking, tactical, sharp player. So let's see how the game went. It was a huge amount of opening theory. It went into a King's Indian with Bishop e3. And the funny thing about this line is I even studied it a few years ago and would have played it for white. All of this is theory. There's games with Onashuk where this has been played before, where Onashuk had the white pieces. You just trade queens, castle, and the idea is white is hoping they have a slightly better position here due to this knight kind of being misplaced, and white has all the pieces developed, whereas black doesn't quite yet. It's nothing huge, because now we're trading a pair of pieces, but it's something. And I think up to now, almost all of this has happened. I'm checking my database real quick. I forget when they first diverged. Okay, f3 was played in some year, 2011, and black in that game went knight to d4. But okay, in this game, Nakamura just took, traded, and just traded all the pieces, thinking, Levon, what are you going to do to me? It's just an endgame. With almost all the pieces off the board, the pawn structure symmetrical. So you may ask, how can white have anything here? Well, white does have something small, is that this knight is kind of tied down, because if it moves, this knight hops into the beautiful f5 square. Second thing that white has, the black bishop is somewhat restricted by these pawns. It's not the same case with the white bishop. Thirdly, this knight is well placed, I guess, although blacks can also go to d4. But on d5, the bishop, like if we put this knight on d5, this bishop cannot take it. Whereas if he puts his knight on d4, our bishop can take on d4. And also, our king is slightly closer to the center of the board. So these are all minor little things, but they do matter. And this is what made Aronian's tournament so impressive to me. Whenever he was white, he seemed to get the smallest possible advantages, usually using some kind of opening theory that he worked on, and then he would grind people down. He would find a way to win the game from these small advantages. One thing I do think about this game, I think Hikaru made a poor opening choice. I don't think this is a good opening to play, because you're basically just slightly worse right away with zero chance to win. So what you're doing is you're playing for two results, the loss or the draw, and when you're playing somebody of Aronian's caliber, losing is a very strong possibility. So I just don't think it was the best way to play against this line from Nakamura's standpoint, and you're going to see why. So white starts with bishop to f2. a6 is played. He brings the king in, black brings the king in, white brings the king in, and then black brings the king in. So now white to move. Pause the video. Think about what move you might play here. Alright, so now I'm going to show what was played. Like I said, this knight on f5 would be a beautiful thing, whereas this bishop is not the best bishop. So white starts a typical trading maneuver. Bishop to e3. His idea is simply, at some point, to take this knight and plant his knight on the beautiful f5 outpost. I think this is quite a good move. So black played king to e6, and now white played knight to a4, with ideas of knight c5 check. Bishop to f8 was played to kind of keep the knight out of c5. But now white did trade on h6, and black traded. So once again, pause your video, figure out what move you would play here for white. So this is a key moment. There's a few tempting moves, knight f5 and knight c5. One is much better than the other. If knight f5, bishop f8, keeping the knight out of c5. However, if knight c5, black would like to go king to d6. Unfortunately, the f5 square is juicy now, forking the king and the bishop. So white would first sacrifice the knight for the pawn, win the bishop, and then be up a pawn, and then king and knight endgame. So black can't really allow that. And after knight c5, he was forced to retreat the king, which is good news for white. And now Aronian didn't go knight f5 right away. But first, because if knight f5, bishop f8 kicks the knight away. And we want to keep that knight there. So he played another logical endgame move, bringing the king towards the center of the board. So now if bishop f8, white has time to go king c4. Therefore, black played bishop to f4. White played h3, bishop g5, knight f5, and then black played the interesting knight to e6. The idea here is that if white takes on b7, black will go knight f4 check. However, white can also take on e6 and have a good knight versus a bad bishop. So my question to you, the viewer, is what move should white play? Pause your video, try to figure out what you would do. Alright, so objectively in this position, Aronian makes the poor choice. However, he also makes the most risk-free choice, which is a common theme among strong players. That sometimes they will go for a position that's risk-free where they don't have to calculate. They can just use their positional judgment, even though the other line happens to be winning. So like knight takes b7 turns out to be a winning move. After king c4, knight h3, b4, and we're just going to push these pawns down the board. It's not as easy to calculate as I'm making it seem because black also has a passed pawn. But after knight a6, h5, b5, that pawn is very hard to stop. b6, h3, b7, h2, and now knight to g3, and white is winning. And of course, the game won't go exactly like that. I was just demonstrating one line. It just turns out the knight takes b7 does win the game. So a lot of people in annotations are like, you know, Aronian messed up here, blah, 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 we had an easy win. It's not so simple. Now, first of all, yes. After the game, probably Aronian's like, well, maybe I should have played knight takes b7, because it does win. However, what he does instead is he goes for this. Now, okay, he's going to win. He's going to win after this move. But during the game, he doesn't know that for sure. You know, it requires some calculation. It's near move 40, so who knows how much time he has left. Although probably a lot, because the first 20 moves were all theory. But if knight takes e6, king takes e6, he knows he has an advantage here. He has this beautiful knight against this bad bishop, and he has to believe that his winning chances are good here too. Yet it doesn't require calculation. He just knows. It's just for sure he has good chances to win. And even if it's not winning, black could mess up. Very easy to mess up in such a position where you're just passive and you have a bad piece against a good piece. So I think from a practical standpoint, Aronian played the wrong move, according to computer analysis. But in reality, what he did is very understandable, and a lot of players would do it. And when you read a game annotation and they just put a question mark next to it and say, this is Aronian's first mistake of the game, they should have done this, 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 that doesn't really take into account the psychology and the thought processes of good players, you know? The game analysis afterwards is people who have Houdini running, and it's just not fair to the players. So, my opinion, what he did is very normal, and just very understandable for many reasons. However, objectively, the position does turn out to be drawn here. White cannot break through with perfect play. Perfect play, though, it's not easy to come by. b6 was played to keep the king out. White went a4 to try to, like, make something happen on the queen side. Bishop to d2 was played. And now it's not so easy for white. If b4, I can't remember, I think a5 is a decent try. But he played b3. And now, one thing about Hikaru Nakamura that we know, he's an aggressive player. And sometimes that helps him. Sometimes it haunts him. Sitting and defending stodgily a worse position is not in his nature. So he played a move h5, which is a little risky. However, if knight g7, followed by knight takes, this knight has only one square, g3, so black cuts it off and then wins the knight with king g6. However, I still think it's a slightly risky move, because in many variations, maybe knight g7 will work. White played b4, black played a5, takes and takes. And notice this bishop has no targets at all, whereas the white knight can kind of hop around and attack things. King to b5 was played, and now is when black makes the fatal error. And notice one more thing. It's move 40. This is move 40 of the game, the last move of time control, a very common place to blunder. The best move that does hold the balance is king to f7. And after, white should go after the a-pawn, or it looks like white should. But actually, it just doesn't quite work out. I mean, it looks good, but suddenly this king is coming in, and it's going to take this pawn, and then this pawn is very fast. A key thing about these kinds of positions, when there's a passed pawn on both sides of the board, the bishop is much stronger than the knight. Because the bishop can defend the square from all the way over here. This knight has to get, it takes a bunch of squares to hop over and defend these pawns from coming through. So, like, for example, knight c6, king h4, a5. Even bishop takes a5 here is okay for black. I can't remember how okay it is. Yeah, actually, black is winning. It's that serious. This is how bad the knight is at stopping these pawns. There's no way to stop king g2, taking, pushing the h-pawn, and basically white is falling apart here. So just king f7, keeping the king close to the king side was important, so that if white ever strayed, black's king could come in. Unfortunately, he brought the king the other way, which was a fatal error. And now, after knight to g7, all of a sudden, if something like king e7, we can just take on h5 now. Because the king is further away, the knight has two escape squares, g3 and g7. So just a hideous blunder from Nakamura on move 40. And after king d7, knight g7, put another pawn in the color of the bishop, knight f5, bishop e1, knight to e3. And now next move, after let's say king e6, white can win two ways. First we can go knight c4 and win the a-pawn. Probably that wins. Also we can go knight g2. If the bishop goes this way, we take the h-pawn. If the bishop goes this way, we take the a-pawn. And black's king is not getting the activity that we saw in the other variation. So because of that, after the move knight to e3, Nakamura resigned. So I still like this game by Aronian, even though he made that mistake. You know, he won anyway. Which is like, he won anyway against one of the best players in the world. I mean, yeah, objectively the other move was better, and probably he should have played it. But it's an understandable error, and it does create, you know, a position that Nakamura is going to have trouble defending. Because he did. I think, honestly, though, most of the time he should defend it. I think this time was kind of an accident, let's say. I think usually you give him this position, he'll hold the position and play the right moves. But every now and then he's not going to, and that happened this time. So I just wanted to give you guys some insight on what I thought was going on in their heads during the game. Of course, there may have been some post-game press conferences and stuff that I didn't see, which will kind of explain everything a little better. But that's kind of what I see when I see these moves in this game. So thanks all for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.